Well, then how would the beginning to have this change happen come about? Can government implement things to help that or to create that? Or does this necessitate that this comes from people organizing themselves from the bottom up in a certain sense?
I mean, there are cases where initiatives of the powerful have reduced domination, authority, and violence. There are such cases, but you can't count on that. That's very rare. Almost every positive change you can think of has come about by popular struggle, to which power systems react. You know, they respond. Even a tyranny responds, and certainly a more democratic society does. So there are steps. I mean, there was the New Deal, there was the Great Society, you know, there's women's rights, civil rights. A lot of things have happened as the result of popular struggle, which compelled power systems to adapt. And I can't imagine that history is going to change in that respect.
A couple more questions. You've mentioned fear a lot as a tool of control, and in previous interviews you've mentioned that fear being used in this way tends to destroy compassion and sympathy for others. How do we encourage people to have greater compassion and sympathy for each other, and perhaps encourage that in ourselves as well?
I frankly don't think we have to encourage that. I think it's already there. What we have to deal with is the massive efforts to block it. So that, like imposing fear, inducing fear. I mean, there are campaigns to induce fear, which do, if they succeed, and they often do, overcome natural compassion and sympathy. So, you know, like, say, where I live in near Boston, I mean, if you get periodically dolphins get stranded on the beach, you know, okay, you have hundreds of people going out in ice cold water, you know, struggling, dangerous to try to rescue the dolphins. And they do the same with humans if they know. So therefore they don't know. And people don't know that maybe, like there was an Oxfam report a couple of weeks ago calculating that 16,000 children die every day in Africa and Asia from easily treatable diseases and hunger. Okay, now, and the number of hungry people has just gone over 1 billion. Meanwhile, the rich countries like us are cutting back substantially, 20 to 25%, our contributions, because by the standards of the people who run the country, it's much more important to make sure that Goldman Sachs executives get big bonuses than it is to care about 16,000 children dying a day. Well, if people knew about this, they wouldn't like it, but they don't read headlines about it. In fact, they don't read anything about it, you know. And the same is true of fear. This is a very frightened country. You can ask about the reasons, but it's undoubtedly true, and it actually goes back to colonial times. So when, say, Ronald Reagan, straps on his cowboy boots and declares a national emergency in the United States because of the threat to our existence posed by the government of Nicaragua, which has troops 2 days away from Harlingen, Texas. I mean, instead of collapsing in ridicule, which is what any sane person would do, or maybe sympathy for this poor guy who probably believes it, people mobilized. Well, that takes real fear, deeply embedded fear. Actually, you saw it right before. I mean, the drug war is like that. It periodically is called, you know, government every once in a while calls it drug war. And every time it does, you see a huge spike in popular concern about drugs and what they're doing to our society and how terrible it is, and maybe the communists are getting drugs into or something. Well, you know, drugs are a problem, but they're a domestic problem, and it's known how to deal with them. There are many studies that show that prevention and treatment are far and away the most cost-effective ways of dealing with them. You know, police, interdiction, fumigation in Colombia, the least effective and most expensive. And furthermore, if you actually look at the data, by far the most dangerous substance is tobacco. I mean, way beyond hard drugs. And furthermore, tobacco kills other people. Like, maybe I don't smoke, but if you do, that affects me. Uh, Tens of thousands of people die from passive smoking every year. Even the deaths from passive smoking are probably higher than deaths from all the hard drugs together. And actually, dealing with tobacco, it's interesting the way the tobacco plague has been reduced. These days, you rarely see, say, a student in a university smoking a cigarette. It wasn't criminalized. You know, they didn't fumigate the hills of the fields in North Carolina. You know, they didn't throw thousands of people into jail for smoking cigarettes. It was a cultural change through the 1980s, among more educated sectors at least. There was a kind of an improvement in lifestyles. So more exercise, you know, less red meat, less coffee, less tobacco, and so on. And yeah, so it became more healthy. By now, use of tobacco is pretty much a class issue. I mean, you don't see it at the university, but you do see it, you know, a couple blocks away in the downtown slums. Okay, that's the way to deal with these things. But that's not the way it's done. The government wants to terrify people. So they call a drug crisis. We're being destroyed by the red Chinese or the Hispanic narco traffickers or whoever it may be tomorrow. And it frightens people and it keeps them under control. You know, fear is a method of control and a pretty effective one. And this, from its origins, has been a very frightened country. Again, interesting question why, but it's pretty easy to show.
Well, what is your outlook on the future of this country and of human civilization in general? Are you hopeful or are you pessimistic overall? And could you expand on why?
Well, those questions are pretty closely related. I mean, the United States is, you know, it's not all powerful, but it's about as close to a global sovereign as there's ever been in history. You know, the economic system in the world is by now diversified, but in terms of, say, military power, I mean, the United States is just off the spectrum. The United States spends more on military and intelligence than the rest of the world combined. It's got military bases all over the world. As I mentioned before, it's escalating its military force. It's occupying two countries right in the heart of the energy producing, or off the edge of the energy producing regions. There's no country that's even close, you know. I mean, it's by far the biggest supplier of small arms, so-called small arms, which means, you know, not pistols, but the kind of arms that are actually used in war. I think it's like 70% of the total in the last year. So yeah, what happens here in any domain, global warming, nuclear weapons, whatever it may be, is going to have an enormous impact on the world. Am I optimistic or pessimistic? Well, you can be both if you want. So it's a lot better than it was, say, 40 years ago. For example, take the last election. I mean, I didn't happen to like any of the candidates, but we should ask ourselves, I mean, could you have imagined 40 years ago, or for that matter, 10 years ago, that the Democratic Party would have two candidates, a woman and an African American? You know, it's kind of like unthinkable. Okay, it happened, and it happened because of a significant change in the culture. Same with lots of other dimensions. So yes, we see lots of cases of real progress. On the other hand, there's always a counter-reaction, and it's powerful, and it can be very dangerous. Repeat what I said at the beginning. This probably unreported poll today, or mostly unreported, could be a death sentence for the species. I mean, if Americans are convinced that human activity doesn't contribute to global warming, we can kiss each other goodbye.